Well, hello. Today's a great day for hop. We're going to be doing some sanding today. Come on along. Welcome to vanofaction.com, where we're taking a 2018 Dodge ProMaster van and turning it into a family camper. Along the way, we're sharing the journey, but today we're sharing something that anyone who wants to do some fine woodworking should know. You can use this in your van, you can use it in your house, you can use it for a really nice Christmas present. If you find this useful, give us a like, a share, and a subscribe, and by all means, leave us a comment. Let's get started. Well, welcome back, folks. This is a big day for me. I've got all the cedar that I can put on in this section on. It's been screwed on, glued on. The holes have been plugged. The plugs have been chiseled off. It's been rough sanded. And now I just have to do a final sanding, and then I can urethane this part of it. There's still some cedar to go because I have to get my upholstered panels on before I can finish off some of it. But this is as far as I can go for this stage. It's a big threshold to cross, and I'm going to do some sanding now, and follow along with me. Now, just as a review, the plugs, they're chosen for their color and the grain, and they're put in the piece of wood that they're plugging in the same direction as the grain runs in that piece of wood. It's a little tedious, but you got to be really careful and make sure you locate them right. And then you pair them off as close to the surface as you can with a really sharp chisel. But you never get it all. So, after that operation, you sand it off with a mechanical sander. I'm using my pad sander because I have to take off the top layer of wood that's absorbed a little bit of the glue resin, because if I don't, when I urethane it or stain it, it's going to mar the finish. I've got to get that top layer off, but that still leaves the surface a little bit rough. So in order to finish it properly, I've got to finish off with a very fine, maybe 220 or 300 grit sandpaper by hand to make sure that it's right. And right there, that is the most important part of the whole job. I hope you can hear me okay. It's raining in the mountains today and it's bouncing off the roof of my shop. I've seen so many people spend a lot of time and money on equipment and wood and planning and cutting and fitting and assembling and putting it all together, and then they get really excited and want to see it finished, so they start finishing it before they've really taken the time to sand it as well as it needs to be sanded. And that's the most critical step. That's the step between having something that you're really proud of and people are in awe of, and having something that looks okay, but it's really a little bit rougher than it needs to be. And that's because when you finish it, it becomes rougher than it is. Now, there's different types of roughness. This is a piece of rough cut cedar that came out of the mill. It's really rough cut. If you were to run a piece of wood over a table saw, though, you would get a cut on the edge that would look like this. Hopefully you can see that. The saw marks from the table saw. You can't just finish that. You have to sand that off. Now, if it's a big flat surface and you have a lot of it, you can run it through what's called a surface planer. It looks like this. This is a little one. It's the one that I bought. I paid $150 for it used. They retail for somewhere between $500 and $5,000 depending what you wanted. It does a really good job. It takes the roughness off of the wood and makes it smooth and flat. Now, this is a piece of rough cut cedar. This is what it looks like after it's gone through the planer. It makes it a lot better. Now, what I did for my particular build was I took my 3/4 inch tongue and groove cedar and I ripped it down the middle to make two skinny pieces, and then I ran it through the surface planer to end up with pieces of wood that look like this. What I actually did in reality was I took this piece and made two of these pieces, so I ended up with twice as much wood that was half as heavy as it was, and this is very expensive wood, so by doing it the way I did it, I ended up paying for the surface planer for free many times over. It worked out really well for me. It made the build less heavy. But at the end of the day, it made the wood smooth. But that's not smooth enough to finish yet. When you buy, if you run it over the table saw, you get these saw marks. They definitely have to be sanded out. But even if you buy it right off the rack, and hopefully you can see this, but this is a piece of wood, top quality, kiln dried, select grade cedar. It's the best cedar money can buy, and it comes off the shelf with these little ripples in it. Those little ripples are from the big commercial surface planer they use in the mill. You can't not have them. They're in every piece of wood you're going to buy at a lumberyard. But those ripples are going to mess up your finish. You've got to sand those ripples off. You have to. And the reason for that is this. When you finish your wood, you're going to finish it with something that's liquid or moist. There's going to be moisture. And even if you used a wax or a putty consistency or a pudding consistency stain, there's moisture in that finish. And when that moisture hits the wood's going to swell just a little bit. The grain's going to take on some of that moisture and grow just a little bit. But every flaw in the surface becomes magnified because of that. So you want to get rid of those ripples beforehand. In really fine furniture, in a shop I ran in Toronto, the guys would actually sand the pieces they were working on, and then they would spray them with water and wipe them down with water and leave them overnight and come back in the morning and sand it again to get that swell out of the grain. So when the finish went on, the wood didn't grow at all. And that's an extreme case, but you need to get rid of those planer marks no matter what. There's a couple of ways to do that. Depending on the material you're working with, if it's hardwood, then you might want to use a machine first. If you're trying to get rid of saw marks, that's a lot of work to do by hand, so you want to use a machine first. So you want to use either, in the video earlier, I was using my pad sander. Now this sander oscillates, which means it goes around. It doesn't go back and forth this way, it actually rotates this way. So I was using that sander to remove the glue from the wood and take the plugs down to a flatter surface, but this is not the finished sanding, because this will leave little marks. No matter how fine the sandpaper you're using, it'll leave little scores in the surface of the wood that'll show up on a stain. You'll see it. Another type of sander you can use if you have a lot of it is a belt sander. That's this kind. And in this case, the belt goes in one direction. It's heavier though. It goes in one direction. You'll use this for larger jobs, not little jobs. It's hard to use, to have the control to use the end properly. You could actually, I've melted my belt sander in a table before and ran across. You can put a sander on it in a drill press if you chose to. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but it's absolutely critical that you sand those machine marks out of your wood in order to get them smooth enough that you can start to put the finish on. And then after you've done your machining and you've got it to where you think it's really smooth with either your oscillating sander or your belt sander or your drill press, whatever it might be, then you finish by hand. The last passes you take are always by hand, always with a really fine paper, either nothing coarser than a 220. You could even use a 400. And these passes are always taken with the grain. Never, ever, ever sand across the grain. You'll end up with, no matter how fine a paper you're using, it's going to leave score marks, it's going to mar the finish, and when you stain it, you're going to see it. Always finish with the grain by hand. And then, when you put your finish on, the grain doesn't swell so much. In between coats, you buff it off with a 220 or a 400 grit paper, and then wipe off the dust, and 4 or 5 coats, and you end up with something that you're really proud of. Looks fantastic, and will last a lifetime. I'm really pleased with the way this has turned out. It just takes a little bit of patience, a little bit of knowledge. You can do this. It's easy. Thanks for watching. Remember, give us a like, a share, a subscribe, and watch these other videos. There's lots to learn and lots to do.